Welcome. Today we're doing a deep dive into the life and the legacy of Pope Francis, especially looking at things following his recent passing.
Yes, Jorge Mario Bergoglio, born back in Buenos Aires, Argentina, December 17th, 1936.
Right.
And he became Pope Francis March 13th, 2013. And it's worth remembering just how significant that election was.
Absolutely.
I mean, the first pope from the Americas, the very first Jesuit pope, and, well, first non-European pope in something like 1,200 years. His papacy then ended on April 21st, 2025.
A really historic figure in so many ways. And we now know the circumstances of his death. He passed away at his residence, the Doma Sanctae Morte in the Vatican, apparently after a stroke that led to a coma and then ultimately irreversible cardiac arrest. Cardinal Kevin Farrell made the official announcement.
Yes, that's correct.
So our goal today really is to get into his life story, try to understand his vision for the church and, explore the kind of impact he had, not just on Catholics, but much wider than that.
Definitely. He had a huge global presence.
And there were some, let's say, surprising turns during his papacy, too. So maybe let's start right at the beginning. Let's try and unpack what shaped him.
Sounds good. Well, his Argentinian background is just fundamental, isn't it? Yeah, and you have to understand that to grasp his priorities later on.
Okay.
Born to Italian immigrants, a working class family. His father worked on the railways. His mother was a homemaker. So he really saw firsthand the struggles of ordinary people.
You think that direct experience built that empathy he was known for?
I think it must have. That connection to people on the margins, it seems deeply rooted in his upbringing.
But interestingly, his first career path wasn't the church at all, was it? He started out studying chemistry.
That's right, yeah. It's fascinating to think about.
What does that tell us? What might have drawn him to chemistry initially, and then what prompted such a major shift?
Well, an interest in chemistry. It suggests a certain kind of mind, perhaps. Analytical, maybe wanting to understand how things work, the structure of things.
Sure, I can see that.
But then comes this big change in 1958. He feels this call to religious life, joins the Society of the Jesuits. That's a huge pivot.
A massive reorientation. And the Jesuits themselves, they have a very particular charism, don't they?
Exactly. Their whole tradition emphasizes rigorous education, a strong commitment to social justice, and this kind of global missionary outlook.
So that focus on education, thinking critically, engaging with the world,
Yeah.
that must have clicked with him.
It seems like a perfect fit in retrospect, and it clearly became a really formative influence.
And his own formation within the order was pretty thorough.
Oh, absolutely. He didn't just dabble. He dove deep into humanities, philosophy, theology, got degrees.
Right.
He even taught for a while literature, psychology at Jesuit colleges. That probably helped him hone how he communicated, how he understood people.
Makes sense. And then ordained in 1969.
Yes, and what's quite remarkable is how quickly he rose within the Jesuit ranks in Argentina. He became the provincial superior from 1973 to 1979.
And that period in Argentina, politically, it was incredibly turbulent, wasn't it, under military rule?
Extremely. A very difficult, very dangerous time. Leading a religious order then must have come with enormous pressures.
I can only imagine.
And look, his role during the dictatorship, it's complicated. It's been debated, scrutinized.
Yeah. There has been criticism.
There has, but it's also pretty widely recognized now that he did work discreetly behind the scenes to help protect people who are being persecuted.
So navigating treacherous waters.
Very much so. It highlights the kinds of impossible choices leaders can face in those situations and, how actions can be interpreted differently later on.
Fast forward a few decades, 1998. He's appointed Archbishop of Buenos Aires. How did all those earlier experiences, the working class roots, the Jesuit formation, leading during the dictatorship, how did that shape him as Archbishop?
Profoundly, I'd say. His time as Archbishop really seemed to crystallize those earlier influences. His connection to ordinary Argentinians, the Jesuit focus on justice, It all came together.
And that famous humility really came to the fore then, didn't it?
It did. Choosing to live in a simple apartment, cooking his own meals, taking the bus, this wasn't just for show.
No, it felt authentic.
It was a very real statement about solidarity with the poor and, frankly, a break from how many high-ranking church officials lived. It really resonated with people in Buenos Aires. He built this reputation as a pastor who was genuinely close to his flock.
It certainly projected a different image of church leadership. And his focus wasn't just internal church matters.
Not at all. He was very outspoken against poverty, against corruption. He constantly stressed the church's duty to stand with the disenfranchised and push for social justice.
And interfaith work started becoming important, too.
Yes, very much so during his time as archbishop. He actively built bridges with the Jewish and Muslim communities in Argentina. That commitment to dialogue, it really laid the groundwork for his later global efforts as pope.
Which brings us to 2013. Pope Benedict XVI resigns, the first pope to do so in nearly 600 years. Just a huge, unexpected moment. What was the feeling around that time leading up to the conclave?
Oh, there was a real sense of uncertainty, I think, and maybe anticipation. A feeling that the church was facing some significant challenges.
Internally and externally.
Both. Issues within the church, but also its place and relevance in a world that was changing incredibly fast. So when the conclave elected Cardinal Bergoglio and then he chose the name Francis, well, that sent an immediate signal.
A very powerful signal, right? St. Francis of Assisi.
Exactly. A name almost universally linked with poverty, with simplicity, with caring for creation. It immediately suggested a shift in priorities, maybe a desire to reconnect the church with some of its most fundamental values. Lots of people felt that was needed.
And his first appearance on the balcony of St. Peter's, it was striking in its simplicity, wasn't it?
It really was. Very understated. Just asking people to pray for him before he blessed them. It conveyed this sense of humility, of service that felt different. And his papal motto reinforces that, doesn't it? Miserando atque eligendo.
Which means?
Roughly, by having mercy, by choosing him. It points to God's mercy as the reason for his calling, and really the core mission of the church as he saw it.
And that theme of mercy just ran right through his papacy, didn't it? Alongside very strong stands on big global issues.
Absolutely. Poverty, climate change, immigration, refugees. These were constant refrains. He kept coming back to them again and again.
You mentioned climate change. His encyclical Laudato Si's in 2015 felt like a landmark moment on that front. For listeners maybe less familiar, an encyclical is a major teaching document from the Pope.
It really was a landmark. Laudato Si's had an impact far beyond the Catholic Church.
It seemed to cut across religious lines, didn't it? It became this key text for anyone talking about environmental responsibility and social justice globally.
It did, because it framed the ecological crisis not just as an environmental problem, but as a deeply moral and ethical one. It argued very forcefully that degrading the environment and marginalizing the poor are two sides of the same coin.
Interconnected issues.
Exactly. And by using both scientific evidence and theological reflection, Laudato Si's managed to speak to a really broad audience. It sparked conversations, prompted action in all sorts of places. Was it unusual, do you think, for a pope to engage so directly with science like that?
I think it certainly elevated the profile of the issue. Framing environmental protection as a core part of social justice felt significant. And then there was his approach to some of the trickier, more sensitive issues within the church itself.
Right.
He often talked about needing a more inclusive, more compassionate pastoral style, even while, upholding traditional church teachings.
That pastoral sensitivity was definitely a defining feature. You saw it on issues like communion for divorced and remarried Catholics, or how the church should engage with LGBTQ plus people.
He emphasized understanding accompaniment.
And looking at individual situations, individual lives, rather than just applying rules rigidly. And of course, there's that famous off-the-cuff remark.
Who am I to judge?
About gay priests, right? Yes. That line just went global. It really captured his approach and sparked so much discussion about judgment, inclusion, empathy, way beyond just church circles. What was your take on the impact of that specific comment?
It felt like it shifted the tone, didn't it? Maybe opened a door for a more empathetic conversation, less about condemnation.
Yeah.
But his influence wasn't just about tone or internal church debates. He was very active on the world stage.
Oh, very much so. He met with countless world leaders. He addressed the UN. He even played a role in diplomacy. Remember the thawing of relations between the U.S. and Cuba?
Right, he was involved there.
And his advocacy for refugees and migrants was relentless, constantly reminding leaders, and all of us really, about their inherent dignity and rights. He used that platform as a powerful moral voice.
But it wasn't all smooth sailing. His approach, his vision, it definitely faced pushback, didn't it?
No, not everyone was on board. That's true. You had some more conservative groups within the church who were quite worried.
About what specifically?
They felt his more open, pastoral approach, particularly on things like communion for the remarried, might be watering down doctrine, maybe a departure from tradition.
I see.
And then there was the ongoing sexual abuse crisis. That continued to cast a shadow, and his handling of it faced a lot of scrutiny. Survivors, advocacy groups, many felt he needed to be more decisive, ensure greater accountability.
So complexities and criticisms alongside the praise.
Definitely. It's important to see the full picture, the range of reactions to his leadership.
Which brings us to his final years and his passing on April 21st. He was 88. It really does feel like the end of an era.
It does. His death at the Domus Sanctae Marthae came after some well-documented health struggles in recent years. The funeral is set for April 26th in St. Peter's Square.
And there's that interesting detail about where he wished to be buried.
Yes. It is unusual, perhaps, like you suggested, a final gesture towards simplicity, maybe wanting to be in a place more easily accessible to ordinary Romans. It's intriguing.
It is, and the sheer volume of tributes pouring in from all corners of the globe, it just underlines the kind of impact he had, didn't it? Way beyond any single faith.
Absolutely. When you look at his legacy, what seems to stand out is that vision he articulated. A church that is poor and for the poor.
That phrase really stuck.
It did. And his push for reform, for reflection within the church itself, combined with that relentless focus on humility, mercy, social justice, and crucially, care for the environment. He really did try to steer the church towards being more engaged with the messy realities of the modern world.
So wrapping up this deep dive then, we've traced quite a journey from that working class kid in Buenos Aires to the pinnacle of the Catholic Church. We've seen his consistent focus on the marginalized, those groundbreaking statements on social and environmental justice, and also acknowledged the debates and criticisms his leadership sparked.
Exactly. It was a papacy marked by both continuity with core traditions and some really significant shifts in tone, emphasis, and approach.
So maybe a final thought for our listeners to ponder. Pope Francis put such a strong emphasis on mercy and social justice. How might those particular themes continue to ripple outwards? How might they shape where the Catholic Church goes next, and how could they keep influencing wider conversations about ethics, about human dignity, globally? What parts of his legacy do you think will really endure?
That's the big question, isn't it?
It is. And maybe exploring some of his key writings, like Laudato Si's or Evangelii Gaudium, might offer more clues. Definitely worth exploring further.